Welcome to Chronological Order, part of the Really Dang Good Toastmasters series, or RDG. This is about the timer roll and how you can do it and what you need to do it well. Let's get started. Imagine your meetings, your speeches, your table topics, your evaluations completely unbound by time. You could do a speech within seconds, finish a level within a minute or two. Or, conversely, a total nightmare. You could have the opposite, where a speech goes on for hours, days, weeks, months, years. Everyone's stuck in their seat, unable to leave. There's no escape. Well, fortunately, that's why we have a timer. Welcome to RDG Timer, and the title of this program is Chronological Order. As you can see, we're imposing a little bit of time order for our meetings. And timer is a critical role, as you've hopefully seen from these scenarios. It prevents us from doing almost nothing to way too much, but it's also a great role for beginners to get into, and we're going to show you how to do it. Why should you listen to me? Well, you may have seen the rest of this program, and you've seen I've written a lot. I put out some videos, but I'm a Toastmaster, who's earned their DTM, and I've had 15 plus years of experience. I'm a former area governor, division governor, back the old terms, and I've really, the important point is I've learned how to screw up so you don't have to. I'd like to pass along that knowledge and shorten your learning curve. So with that said, let's get started. All right, what is the timer roll? Why do I care? What is this program? Now, timer is pretty much what it says on the tin. Even if you don't have any familiarity with Toastmasters, you say timer and it makes sense what you're going to be doing. Like I said, it's a great starter role. You can get some speaking time by just giving your reports and introducing yourself, etc., and it gets you participation in the meeting. You have two major roles, which we'll go into more in detail in this program. First is, again, what it says on the tin. You're going to be timing speeches, table topics, evaluations. And depending on your club, you might time other roles, such as the GE, the General Evaluator Report, or the Grammarian Report, etc. Now, everything in this program is based on my experience with Toastmasters. Your club probably will vary, so make sure you take the advice that's given here and apply it, within the confines, the boundaries of your club. The second goal of the timer is to make sure that the meeting runs on time, and we'll get into that as well. And for being the timer, your club probably has these materials, but just to make sure, you're going to need something to keep time with, a stopwatch of some design. And you're also going to need something to indicate green, yellow, or red periods. The minimum time, you hit the middle time, and the maximum time. So that said, what are you going to get by being a timer? I already mentioned that you participate in the meeting. It feels good to, help out and volunteer, but I feel like you get some good time awareness. So when you do your own presentations and you see those flags, okay, that makes sense why I'm there. And I'm not panicking because I know that timer isn't trying to, slap me with the cards or the flags or whatever. It's just, they're just doing their job. And I also feel as timer, you can gain some focus and concentration, because sometimes it's really easy to be drawn into a speech and suddenly it's, 10 minutes later and it's like, oh, I forgot to put those flags up. Don't worry, that's happened to me. Anyhow, let's go in a little bit more about what I mean by RDG and RDG timer. What's the difference? So RDG is a philosophy of making things better. We progress, not perfection, etc. But we also have some values like we want to be prepared. And that's what this program is going to help you be, is prepared. And it's also going to tell you, hey, what do I need to do ahead of the meeting? What should I plan for? I also want you to be a little bit creative. And once you're comfortable with introducing the role and doing it, how can we make it just a little bit more fun? Also, let's increase your skills base, your knowledge of the timer, which this program is meant to do. So you're going to be able to know, okay, if I screw up this, what do I do to fix it? Or when do I start timing? Actually, when do I click the start button on my stopwatch or what have you? And finally, adaptability. What happens if a speaker comes in and says, I need like 2 more minutes on this. Can you please, can you adapt to that? So that gives you an idea of what we're looking for in an RDG timer. And when you start, and because this is a beginner role, I expect people to just do the basic stuff to get comfortable, because you may come into Toastmasters like I was. I was terminally afraid, and it took me a while just to, defrost myself and be comfortable in my own skin there. So we'll start you off as, this is like your first Toastmasters meeting, and we'll go from there. Now, that said, let's talk about job number 1. How am I going to time the speeches? The first thing we want to do for job number 1, because it's kind of the obvious what's on the tin job as the timer, is, okay, what are the times the speakers have? Now, for speeches, usually for the first speech, the icebreaker, that's going to be 4 to 6 minutes. And they can go over or under 30 seconds. Now, for most speeches, it's going to be 5 to 7 minutes with that same 30-second grace period under or over. So if they're doing a 5 to 7 minute speech and they come in at 4 minutes and 36 seconds, they're good. If they come in at 7 minutes and 36 seconds, they're not good. And you'll have the chance to say that. We'll talk about giving you reports and such later. Now, I say consult with the speakers because sometimes, especially advanced speakers, we want more time, or we want maybe less time. Who knows? And there's no hard and fast rule in Toastmasters that says if you request, 1.5 more minutes for an icebreaker, that you're going to be kicked out of the club. I hope that doesn't happen anywhere, but there you go. So I've requested more time for speeches I felt were more involved and provided value. So just be aware of that. But let's talk about what you need, kind of those prerequisites, as you will. The first thing you'll want is something to keep time with. Now, it's ironic, your role is called the timer, but if you use a countdown timer, that's a bad move. What I mean by countdown timer is you say you start your clock at 7 minutes 30 seconds and you just let it tick down. That has a few problems. If I do a speech and I end up taking 8 minutes and 27 seconds and used a countdown timer, first, I'm going to get interrupted and be like, oh, okay. And 2, you're not going to know how much time I actually took, which can help me pare down my speech. So you can use lots of digital wristwatches have a stopwatch function, and almost every smartphone has a clock which has the stopwatch function there. Alternatively, you can also, for iOS and Android, download the Toastmasters app, and that has a built-in speech timer there, which actually has red, green, yellow in there. The other thing you'll need is some sort of flag mechanic. That could be timing lights, or it could be cards, or something else that just indicates what time period they're in. Now, for virtual meetings, you can download virtual backgrounds. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So just so you know, again, we started talking about the timings for these the speeches, etc. Speeches, usually 4 to 6 for number 1, 5 to 7 otherwise, but there are some speeches that take different timings. So just be aware of that. You want to usually get in contact with your speaker ahead of time and just confirm, hey, I'm seeing on our club management that you're doing a 5 to 7 minute speech. Is that right? They may say, sure, that's right, or no, I need 6 to 8, whatever. So there's that. And with speeches, usually there's a grace period of under 30 seconds or over 30 seconds. So be mindful of that. For table topics, usually in most cases, that's going to be at 1 to 2 minutes. And like speeches, you give the green at the minimum time. So like speeches, you would give the green at 5 minutes for, if it's a 5 to 7. In table topics, that'll be at the 1 mark. And then you'll give the yellow at 1.5, and then the red at 2. Now, the advice is usually hold up the flag and just keep it held up until the next one comes up. And we don't start by holding the green flag up because we want to signal with the green that we're doing the minimum time. So the trick is we want to watch for the first word or the first gesture that they make. Now, if they start by just pointing and they don't say anything, that's still a gesture. That's when you're going to start your time. So when they do either a first word or first gesture, that's when you start your time. When they reach that minimum time, that's when you raise the green. When they come up to the middle part, raise the yellow, keep it held up. And when they hit red, raise the red, keep that held up. And generally, we don't wave anything in a real life meeting or flash things or do whatever. However, especially since when I'm recording this, a lot of people are doing virtual meetings, you may need to unmute yourself and pipe up and say red. You may want to confer with your speaker, hey, do you want audio cues? Do you want visual cues? Do you want both? How do you want this to work? If you have vision impaired people in your club, then you may want to ask, hey, how do you want me to signal you that you've reached your green, your yellow, your red? And they may say, I just want an audio cue, I want a bell, I want whatever it is they're going to do. Okay? Now, we said speeches, 4 to 6 for that first one, 5 to 7 usually. Table topics, 1 to 2. You can go over by 30 seconds in table topics. You cannot go under. And evaluations are 2 to 3. So 2, 2.5, 3, and 30 seconds over for that grace period. That's usually the baseline. Some clubs adjust those a little bit, but those are the standard timings. All right, let's talk about job number 2. Job number 2 is not usually as used as much, and this is keeping the meeting on time as a general follow-along kind of rule. So, especially with corporate clubs, this is very important. If you have a lunchtime club that only has an hour or less, you need to help keep that meeting on time. And even for community clubs where you have more time or you're flexible on time, we still need to keep the meeting on time. For a corporate club or a lunchtime club that has an hour, you can kind of split it up. 5 minutes for opening materials and 15 minutes for speeches, 15 minutes for table topics, 15 minutes for evaluations, and 5-minute closing, 5 minutes for everything else that might crop up. So that's kind of a good rule of thumb, at least a starter. And you may need to adjust. So if there are more speakers, you take away table topics time. And just kind of be mindful of, okay, we're at 12:40 and the table topics person is calling for another table topic. You may need to speak up, and we'll show you how to do that in a minute. For a community club, my rule of thumb is that if you have one speaker, your meeting is going to take 1 hour. For each additional speaker you add, you're adding 15 minutes. And it seems like, well, why? Because the speech only takes 5 to 7. Well, we also have to introduce that speaker, and we have to do an evaluation of the speaker. And that takes time. So 15 minutes extra. So if you've got one speaker, 1 hour. If you've got 3 speakers, you're looking at an hour 30. Now, let's say you're pretty far along in your meeting. That table topics master is they're on a roll, but you need to kind of rein them in. That's usually where you need to speak up as a timer. And they're like, okay, well, let's do one more. And usually you want to cut them off about there and just raise your hand or raise your virtual hand if you're doing a Zoom or whatever meeting and say, point of order, we're at 12:40. We need to get to evaluations, etc. So that's exactly how to do it. You can modify the language a little bit. Just be nice. Just make it so that they're aware. All right. So now that you know the two main jobs of the timer, let's talk about some common questions. Now, some of the questions I get usually when I teach this to new members is, okay, what are the speaker times? And we run over those. For an icebreaker, you've got that 4 to 6 minutes, and you can go over under by 30 seconds. And for most speeches, it's going to be 5 to 7 minutes, so 5, 6, 7. And again, you have 30 seconds of brace either under or over. What happens if someone says, hey, I've got a 5 to 7, but this needs to be a 6 to 8 to really get it across? Coordinate with your Toastmaster, let them know, and also have the speaker put that in their introduction so that everybody gets reminded and they're not going, oh, why is this guy taking so long? What do you do if someone is going way over time? They're just not stopping at all. And especially in a corporate club or like lunchtime club, this can be a real interruption. It can cause problems with your schedule. And that is something that your club really has to determine. If they're going over by just minutes a minute, like it's a 5 to 7 minute and they're coming up on minute 10, you may have to clap them down. It's just start saying, point of order, we're at almost 10 minutes with this speech. And this is something, again, your club is going to have to decide. If they're going just way over time, what do you do? Especially in virtual meetings, make sure you speak up. And because I found, especially when a speaker is presenting PowerPoint like this, they can't see a thing. They can't see any flags. So having that prior communication that you're going to give them an audible red at the predetermined time is a lifesaver. So you can try and prevent them by going over time with audible cues and visual cues. But if they're still going, then you may need to flag them down, clap them down, say, sorry, we need to move on with the meeting. All right, we talked about grace periods. 30 seconds over or under only applies to speakers. The 30 seconds over applies to table topics and evaluators, and it does not apply to, you can't do a 30-second table topic and expect to get away with it, let's just say. So there's that. And what modifications do we need for virtual meetings? There's a couple, and I've talked about it a bit so far in that you may need more audible cues, saying red or green, depending on what the speaker wants. And there's a few other modifications that help. And the first is Toastmasters offers some downloadable Zoom backgrounds, and you can set a virtual background in almost any conferencing program, whether it's Teams or Zoom, Skype, whatever. You can set a virtual background to put green all around you, or yellow or red, and that makes it an easy cue. The other thing is in your introduction on virtual meetings is tell them to pin you when they're speaking so that you always show up, and that way they'll definitely see your cues. It just makes life a lot easier if they get reminded. All right, let's move on to what you're going to do at the meeting. So you prep for your role, you know the speaker's times, you know how to work your stopwatch, etc. You're ready to go. What do I do at the meeting? Now, most clubs I've found will introduce the roles at the beginning. This gives everybody a little bit of speaking time, and the first thing you're going to need to do is explain your role. And you can do this really easily. Now, on my site, there's a word-for-word thing you can say. If you are that nervous, if you just have that struggle, and I completely understand this is not to shame you or anything. If you are just locking up, trying to think of what to say, please go to the lesson for this on my site, what's linked below, and read the text verbatim if that's what you have to do. I am completely serious about this. Otherwise, you can introduce yourself with, hello, I'm the timer for today, and I'm going to be timing today's speeches, table topics, and evaluations. Now, for speeches, it's my understanding that speaker 1 has a 5 to 7 minute speech, while our second speaker has an 8 to 10, for example. And so you will see the green and show the flag at time X, green and the yellow, and so on. And then for table topics, you all get 1 to 2 minutes. And you'll see the green at 1, the yellow at 1.5, and the red at 2. And you'll have 30 seconds to wrap up. Now for evaluations, very similar, except you have 1 additional minute. You will have a green at 2, a yellow at 2.5, and a red at 3 with 30 seconds to wrap up. Now, if your club times, they say General Evaluators Report, I will also, you can mention that. If it times the Grammarian or WAG report, you can mention that. And then you can just hand it off back to the Toastmaster with, that's my role as a timer. Thank you, Mr. or Madam Toastmaster. So that's how you can introduce yourself. And we'll be talking a little bit about how to make that more fun, how to embrace that RDG creative spirit in the advanced section. But if you're just starting off, please use just a basic introduction until you feel more comfortable. And if you have to read it, you have to read it. No shame. Now, the other thing you have to do at the meeting besides, click the stopwatch, show the flags as we talked about, was also give reports. Now, some clubs do this differently. Some clubs do it by section, so you'll give a report at the end of speakers. Some clubs do it all in one shot. So keep that in mind. What you want to do in your reports, let's say you're doing it per section, and the Toastmaster who did the speeches are done, comments are written, and they're saying, okay, can we get a timers report? So you can, if you're in a real space meeting, you may want to stand up and say, all right, all of our speakers qualified, and some clubs want just that. Some clubs want the precise times given. It's really up to your club how you do it, and some clubs don't really care. Usually, if I'm a timer, I'll just say, thank you, Mr. or Madam or Toastmaster. Yes, all speakers qualified. And I can message them, say if I'm on a Zoom meeting, or if I can slip them a piece of paper later, or just talk to them later and say, hey, you're at 6:03. But if they want the precise times, you can read those off. So you just want something to write that down with too. Now, if someone went overtime or under time, you just have to mention, I'm sorry that person X was disqualified. They were at this time. That's when I would definitely mention the time they took. That way they know they either need to add stuff or take it away. All right. So that's the basics on giving your timers report. If your club does voting, usually if they get disqualified due to time, they're not going to be voted on. But your club may decide, oh, okay, we like that so much, we're going to have a vote to override. It's not a big deal. The only time it will be more strictly considered is during a contest. And most of the rules that and advice I've given you in this program also applies to contest timing. So just holding the time, starting and stopping the timer when the first word is said or when the first gesture is made, and so on. So there you go. Let's go to what are some common at the meeting questions. And the first is, oh no, I was so into this speech that I missed a flag. What do I do? Let's say I'm timing a 5 to 7 minute speech and it's already 5 minutes and 45 seconds. And I realize, oh no, I missed the green. Right away, I would just hold up that green. And once that yellow hit, bring up the yellow. No big deal. If contests have a little bit more consideration for that, like you'll get an extra minute. But just make a note to yourself that, oh, I screwed up that timing. And if it needs to be mentioned, you can. Conversely, what happens, let's say it's a 5 to 7 minute speech, but I thought it's 4 to 6, and I flagged for both green and yellow too early. What do? You can just, for the red, or keep holding up that yellow, for the extended period that you realize, and then when the red comes, just bring it up. It's okay. Or if you realize, you've already flagged red, but they're still in the yellow, just go back to the yellow, and they'll have to. You'll screw up the speaker maybe a little bit, but it's better than thinking they have to sit down immediately. And finally, what if I didn't start my watch, or my stopwatch didn't start at all? I tapped it, but it didn't work. No worries, just start it and try to figure out how much time passed and be conservative about that estimate. And that's the best advice I can give you. If it's a contest situation, you have to give them the extra time. So if they're like 2 minutes into a speech and you realize, oh no, the watch didn't work, just start it then and then time it like you would. Now they have that extra time. And then you can report on that to the chief judge or whatever. All right. So that's the basics of how to be a timer. And some of the situations that can come up, some of the questions I typically get. What about some of the advanced topics? And there's a few things that you can do. One is automating the timing itself, on-screen timers for virtual meetings, and theming. Now, automating the timing, I have some PowerPoint decks that are set to, say 5, 6, 7, so they'll automatically flash. You can just hold up a laptop screen or what have you, and that way it automatically times. There are automated timing lights out there, so that's great. You can do that too. There's also on-screen timers for, let's say you're doing Zoom meetings. I believe they have built-in applications, or if you get fancy, and this is way beyond the scope of this program, you can set up things like OBS or XSplit Presenter or Broadcaster and integrate, say, a program like LiveSplit, which will have an on-screen stopwatch. So there are techniques there. It's beyond the scope of this program to get into. But the last thing you can do is theming. So if you've been in a meeting where the Toastmaster has a theme, then you can customize your reports and your introduction to go along with it. So let's say your theme is espionage, James Bond, that sort of thing. Well, you are the mission timer now. You can say, I'm the mission timer, so I'm going to be making sure that you complete your missions within time. So if you see the green light, that means you've completed your mission. You can return home. Well done. If you see the yellow light, the bad guys are closing in. If you see the red light, you better cut that wire soon because the bomb's going to go off or whatever it is. YouTube not advocating terrorism. Thank you. Anyhow, something fun like that, and it takes minimal prep and planning. And then say, keeping with the same theme, and I'm going to give my end of meeting or end of section report. I say, all right, agents, you have come in within time, or someone failed time, or whatever it's going to be. You can theme it just like you were the mission chronometer for MI6 or whatever in that fictional world. So just make sure you're keying off the Toastmaster theme. If they have something and you do something different, it can feel weird. If there's no theme at all, they don't come up with one, you might want to link it to something event, some event outside. Or I know Toastmaster that likes to rhyme all of his introductions for role meetings, and he's really good at it. So, if that strikes your fancy, hey, go for it. It's just something to embrace the creative spirit of RDG. So, hope that helps. All right, finally, that's pretty much all the advice I have for timer. If you have questions, please leave them in the comments below. All right. If this content helped you out, hey, I just ask you that you subscribe, and if you have questions, please leave comments below like I mentioned. And if you like, for more, go over to my site here at SaturnForge.com and click on the Learn section where you'll find all sorts of courses for Toastmasters. Thanks. Have a good one, and happy timing.